Oh, Brad, are you joining me?
I'm here. Hi, Hugh. How are you?
I am great. Boy, I love Deadfall, but I'm only 200 pages in, and I was explaining to the audience I would have finished it yesterday because it's so good, but the grandkids brought the stomach flu, gave it to me, and I couldn't move
Oh,
yesterday.
no.
So I am not going to give away the ending because as soon as I get free time, I'm going to do the ending. But let's start here. Is there a White Rabbit restaurant in Moscow?
There is, yes.
Have you ever been there?
I have not. I have not. I don't think with everything I've written about Russia, it would ever be safe for me to set foot in that country. So I'm never going. I know
Okay,
you
second thing,
say never, but I'm never going.
I have been. I went to the Pushkin restaurant. I didn't eat a thing, and everybody else on the trip got sick. I just ate Starburst because I didn't trust the borscht. Secondly, how do you say Palianitsia and explain to people why that matters?
So Palinitsia, I can't even pronounce it correctly. This is a word in Ukrainian that means bread, and the way that it's constructed, Russians cannot say the word properly. And so it's kind of like during World War II, you saw this actually in Saving Private Ryan, the challenge and response of flash and thunder. That the Nazis could not repeat those words. So, the Allied troops would use those back and forth to know that it wasn't a Nazi coming up. You would yell that as you approached a position, or if you got challenged, you would have to answer with either flash or thunder. So in Ukraine, in real life, they do use this word for bread to challenge other soldiers to make sure they're not Russians.
That was remarkable detail. I love that detail. Now I want to pay you a compliment. On page 158 begins a gunfight. And the equal of any gunfight I've ever seen described in print. And I read hundreds of thrillers, Brad, but this is quite the gunfight. Well, I'm not going to tell anyone about it, but Scott Harvard, this is a Scott Harvard novel. That is an amazing description. I actually could see it. How long did you work on that sequence?
That one was a really long one. It was really important for me, Hugh, to render these scenes as accurately as possible. So I talked to a lot of people that had been in combat and in gunfight scenes like the ones that I describe in the book. I grew up reading Alistair MacLean, Where Eagles Dare, Ice Station Zebra, and just this kind of a European battlefield always appealed to me as a young reader. And I always wanted to put Harvath in one of these situations. So when the war in Ukraine happened, I started thinking, okay, how might I weave Harvath into this? What might I do? And what might particularly those scenes of combat look like? So this has been something that's been playing out in my head even before the war in Ukraine.
I still have 100 pages to go, and Harvath is right in the middle of it. He's at the front lines, and I know the mission. I know the subplot in DC. I love it all. Deadfall is fabulous. Now, you just mentioned what you grew up on. You must have grown up on Ken Follett, because you give a shout out to Ken Follett. He's been a guest on this show many times. His best book is
Wow.
Pillar of the Earth. I prefer his more modern settings, Eye of the Needle. Well, that's a really nice shout out, Brad. Are those your two favorites?
Yeah, I've been a fan for forever. And Hugh, you and I have talked about my love of reading as a child because in the summers, my parents would finish books and set them on this table on the porch, and I would steal them. So I was reading Freddie Forsyth and Ken Follett and John le Carré at an age I was probably way too young to be reading those things.
Well, I thought Pillars of the Earth is his best, but I've read them all twice, with the exception of the 20th Century trilogy. But those were riveting, too. And here's an interesting thing about you and Ken Follett. You do not stop promoting, even though you don't need to promote. Same is true of Danny Silva and Chuck Box. Ken Follett drove down from L.A. and spent 3 hours in my studio when he was with his grandson. I said, what are you doing? You don't need to promote anything. He said, I want new readers. It's remarkable, and you paid him homage. You also mentioned Wolf Trap by Connor Sullivan. I've never heard of Connor Sullivan or Wolf Trap, Brad. So why that shout out?
So Connor Sullivan is a new author. He's written 2 novels now. He went to the University of Southern California, studied in the creative writing program, as I did at USC, and he won an Edgar Award for Best First Novel. So he's an amazing young writer. And Hugh, it's funny. I mean, I grew up and I got into this business, and guys like David Morrell and Clive Cussler were the elder statesmen. I'm 53 now. I'm now starting to take on that role as an elder statesman within the the thriller community, and I want to help the younger writers reach a broader audience. And you know what? These guys are not my competitors. They're my colleagues. There's 365 days in a year. You could read all the Brad Thor books and then still move on and read other people. So
I'm going to come back with Brad after the break for the podcast, and we're going to continue talking about this. I really can't wait to talk about Givi, the truck driver, because I met his American counterpart in Kosovo 15 years ago. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'll be right back with Brad Thor. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm talking with Brad Thor, author of the brand new book, Deadfall. It's the equal of any book out there today. And some of the combat scenes are the equal of any combat scene I've read in a thriller in a long time. Brad, this is a book about the Ukraine war. And a lot of the audience, I would guess 30% of the audience, doesn't want America involved. I am a big proponent of sending them everything twice, right? I want to give them everything twice for a variety of reasons. So give us your general worldview on the Ukraine war, because it comes through that you are with me on this.
Yeah, I am. Listen, Hugh, I'm an old school conservative. I believe in freedom and democracy, and I also believe in honoring our commitments and honoring our word. And I think a lot of people don't realize that at the end of the Soviet Union, a third of their nukes were in Ukraine, and we practically begged the Ukrainians to let us help them dismantle and get rid of those nukes. And the Ukrainians said to us in the 1990s, they said, okay, America, if we do what you're asking, we understand you're afraid that these nukes could fall into the hands of terrorists and be used against the United States, maybe smuggled into New York City or somewhere in Minneapolis. Okay, so we'll work with you, but on one condition. If you will sign this agreement, that you will make sure that not an inch of our sovereign territory is ever taken away from us if we agree to surrender our nukes. And we said, okay, we'll sign that. It's called the Budapest Memorandum. And they said, let's get the Russians to sign it too. This was pre-Putin, and the Russians signed it as well. And then 2014, what happens? You've got Putin goes in and takes the Donbass, the eastern Ukraine. It is very similar to what Francis Fukuyama said, that history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And this is exactly what Hitler did in Czechoslovakia with the Sudetenland. And Neville Chamberlain, the French Republic, fascist Italy, in the UK, they let it go, and they thought it would slake Hitler's thirst for conquest, and all it did was encourage him. So we owe it to Ukraine to honor our obligations. And you know what? Russia doesn't have the right to go in there. There is no excuse to invade a sovereign territory like that and take it over. It's just, it is inexcusable, and it's horrific what the Russians have been perpetrating in Ukraine.
I agree 100%, Brad. And in fact, yours is the first novel that I have seen that references the Budapest Memorandum. And that is a binding commitment that we made. It's not the NATO alliance, that's Warsaw. We're about to talk about Poland. But we are a signatory to that agreement. It did not commit our troops to it, but we ought to be throwing them everything twice. In fact, you have Scott say at one point, the old Navy SEAL, in the part of the gunfight, in fact, don't ever be part of the problem, be the entire problem. We ought to be giving them everything we've got, be the entire problem for Putin in that. I got one technical question. You've got a character who's quite obviously Putin, but you don't name him Putin. Why is that? Is there a legal reason for that?
Yeah, Putin can kiss my ass. I don't care about a legal reason with Putin at all. No, the reason is the same reason I never wrote about bin Laden, is I knew one day he was going to be captured or dead. And so I don't want to write a book that's got a character from real life that people know is dead. So I created this Russian president years ago, several books ago. My books are
well, that makes perfect sense.
At any point.
Now I want to go to the truck driver. 15 years ago, might be a dozen years ago, I went to Kosovo on a USO thing and was being driven around the Serb-Kosovar checkpoints by a guy who was on his 10th deployment. He was a truck driver in the reserves. He never intended to be 10 times to various places in the world. Iraq, Afghanistan, this was Kosovo. And I said, how's that doing? He said, my employer, the truck driver, heavy equipment operator to be specific, my people I never expected to do 10 tours, but that's what it takes. And I signed on the line and I'm a patriot. I like Givi as much, or Givi. How do you pronounce it, Brad?
You know what, Hugh? It's however you want to pronounce it. I read the name. I have never heard it spoken, so I can't actually give you an accurate pronunciation of it.
Great character. He's a truck driver in Western Ukraine. Well, you tell people about him.
Well, he represents the everyman who gets called to make a decision about whether he's going to step up and do the right thing for his country. I mean, these are people that went to D-Day for us, for the United States. I love the stories about how that generation and the way they were looked at by the generation before them, and then the greatest generation really stepped up. So I think there are more heroes among us than we actually know, whether it's here, whether it's Ukraine. I think in times of testing, we really find out who we are, and we really have some great men and women among us when the call for patriots arises. And that's what he represents in the book.
In Deadfall, there are quite a few great patriotic Ukrainians. I think this might actually help. Everyone who reads it is not going to be unsympathetic to the Ukrainians. I hope you move public opinion with Deadfall. That's not your intention. Your intention is to give people a great summer thriller, and it's a great summer thriller. Mm-hmm. But you can't read about Artem and Simon or however it's pronounced, and not sort of feel that. And the train attack, by the way, that's pretty remarkable writing as well. And that train is a very well-known train. People take that train all the time. Joe Biden took that train. Everyone who gets to Kyiv takes that train because we don't fly in and out, right? We're not doing that.
Right. So I was actually surprised how much was publicized about Biden's trip to Ukraine and Boris Johnson's trips and things like this. And that train is a juicy target, I will tell you that. So, yeah, there was no way I could not include the train and what happens on that train in the book.
Have you spent time in Warsaw, Brad?
No, I have not. I was supposed to go under the previous administration because I've dealt with Warsaw in a couple of the books because I think it's a very important NATO partner. And I have not, though. I'm looking forward to it at some point. COVID.
Well, it's a very
plans.
Your descriptions make me want to go, but people can read it for themselves. Let's talk about the subplot in the United States. We got a crooked senator. We've got a turned senator. He's an ex-senator. And we have an FBI agent who's kind of investigating him for reasons I'm not going to get into, named Carolyn. That's the last name. How much do you know about FBI counterintelligence, Brad? I know a lot about it from my days at DOJ when I was the special assistant for counterintelligence for 2 attorneys general.
You know what? I know a certain amount, having not worked at the FBI, but I grew up with FBI in my family and spending every spring at the National Executive Institute conference where the director would come in and speak. So I got to meet Comey multiple times and Robert Mueller. So I've spent a good part of my life around senior members of the FBI, but not directly in the day-to-day stuff with the counterintelligence people.
You know what rings so true? The first day I got read in 1984, I was told you will be approached by a Soviet at some point, or an East German or a Cuban. Nowadays, it's probably a Chinese. And when you are approached, the first thing you do is call the FBI. You're not in trouble for being approached. You're in trouble if you give them a phone book. And they usually start with, hey, can we have a Department of Justice phone directory, please? That's not classified. And if you don't know that person and you don't know them to be a patriot, you shouldn't do it anyway. But if they're a foreigner, don't do it because your recruitment of Greg Wilson is really wonderfully done. And where did you learn all about that stuff?
Well, that stuff I learned from actually talking to the people that I know from the FBI and having them step me through how this would happen, what we would do in those instances, how the Russians have done it in the past, the Chinese, that kind of stuff. So that's a big part of the hardcore research I do for the books.
Okay, I'm talking to my, by the way, have you got a heart out, Brad? You got another interview coming up? I don't want to screw you.
No, I'm free for you. Yeah,
okay.
No, we can talk.
You've got a minor character, at least he's a minor character for 200 pages. I'll find out today because I'm kind of recovered, by the name of Kyle Paulson. He's up in Bar Harbor, Maine, where I don't spend my summers exactly in Bar Harbor, but I know where it is and I drive through it all the time. Why is Kyle Paulson in Bar Harbor, and why do you put an isolationist that grumpy in Bar? And by the way, he made his money in asphalt, which is just very funny to me.
You know what? It's funny. It seemed like an interesting place to put him, kind of a fish out of water, so to speak, to put him up there. But it's such a beautiful part of the United States, and believe it or not, I found a home that has the exact view that I describe in the book from his office in the book. And asphalt's boring, but some of the most successful people you're ever going to meet have made their livings in interesting industries that are not necessarily sexy. And asphalt happens to be one of them, except in my book, he's got an interesting formula for it. Doesn't crack, makes him a successful guy. But I like this intersection of money and politics. Actually, I don't like it. I like to write about it because I'm concerned with the revolving door with K Street, with, ex-politicians that go and become lobbyists and so on and so forth. So it's a neat chance for me to weave interesting stuff into the book so that when a reader finishes a Brad Thor novel, they're smarter. They know more about what's going on in DC, going on in the world. And so if I give you a great white knuckle thrill ride, I've done my job as an author. But if you know more as an American, then I've done my job as a citizen.
And your division of Beltway elites into three categories is very, very good. And Kyle Paulson is category 3. A money guy who wants his agenda is isolationist, and it's weird. By the way, one of the biggest money people I ever met made broomstick candles. That's all he made, broomstick candles. And his margin was $0.015 per broomstick candle. And he was super wealthy. So I love the boring stuff. I really do. That's very well. Now, a new view that I get out of this. We talk about the Ukraine war as a proxy war for the United States where we're draining Russian resources. You're the first person I've seen presented as a proxy war for China, where they're draining American resources and Western resources. In one way, I don't want to see that out there because it feeds the anti-help Ukraine people. But another way, you're honest. And I had not thought about it from the Chinese perspective. They would love to deplete the West's resources. The good news is what the Ukrainians need is not what the Taiwanese need.
Correct. So we're not in any jeopardy there, kind of on how we protect on two fronts. But listen, if you morally believe, and I'm not the first one to make this argument, if you morally believe that the Russians should not be in Ukraine, you should be 100% for giving them everything, as you said twice. Zelensky should not have to ask 50 times before he gets what he needs. The quicker they get what they need, the quicker they can end the war. There should be an absolutely decisive end to this, and it should be soon. But if we drag our feet, it's going to drag it out, and there's going to be a lot of Ukrainians that get killed. And there's a lot of Russians that don't want to be fighting there, that are being conscripted and being forced to go and fight. So from a moral standpoint, the more stuff we can give Ukraine, the quicker this war can be over, and that's better for everybody.
All right, the one part of the book that I've read thus far about which I had a little reservation is Carroll and the FBI's agent view of the Constitution. Now, he's on an important case, but he's really pushing the line. This is right before I got sick. I don't know how it turns out. He's really pushing the line to get some details to connect dots. Do you think they do that?
You know, it's interesting because I talked to a friend of mine, John Nance, who writes for Town Hall. John gave the book a great review, and John's ex-FBI. And he said he really liked Carolyn because Carolyn reminded him of some kind of the old guard, the generation before him at the Bureau, when he was a junior guy and these guys were seniors. Listen, the gentleman that I knew at the FBI had nothing but the utmost respect and admiration and fealty to the Constitution. That's where... outside of my family, that's where I learned so much about doing the right thing, no matter how hard it is. And that the fact that we don't own this country, we're merely caretakers. We're stewards of the republic. And if we don't do our best, we are not going to be able to hand a freer, more successful, more prosperous nation to the next generation. And that came a lot from my summers or springs with all of those senior FBI people.
You know, Brad, going back many, many decades, when I worked with the counterintelligence folks at the FBI, there was no National Security Division. They worked directly with the AG's office. They would bring back a warrant issued by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, a warrant that, could have been read broadly. But if they wanted to expand surveillance of Agent X beyond the geographic region by one block, they would come back with the warrant amended, and we'd take it over to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. We never got turned down. But I don't know about today. I haven't had a clearance since 1989, so I have no idea what they're doing today. But boy, it's very interesting. Commodore Club. I belong to one club in D.C. I'm not allowed to say its name. Nobody gets to leave someone drinking on their tab. But the Commodore Club is kind of interesting because I live near a yacht club. I've never thought of it before as being, maybe that's a locus of espionage. Is that based on anything, or did you make it? There are clubs all over D.C., by the way. All over D.C.
Right. No, there's clubs in, You know what? There are some I'm going to say this. There are some absolutely asinine conspiracy theories in DC where you have to be an absolute moron to believe them. And there's one that involved a pizza parlor that had a basement,
Oh, yes.
except it didn't have a basement.
QAnon
and
thing.
some jackass showed up with a rifle and popped off a round or two in there. Extremely dangerous. So I love this idea of creating a yacht club on pylons over the water, and yet these mouth breathers think it's got a basement. So that's part of the reason that I was playing with the yacht club thing, because it was impossible at this location for this place to have a basement. Yet the conspiracy went out.
Brad,
of
are you a
control.
sailor? Because there is a yacht club on the Potomac that I run past, or trundle past. I'm no longer a runner. I can't go fast enough. But I go past it every time I go out. And it's sort of, I wonder if he's using this yacht club. Do you know what I'm talking about, or did just whole cloth come out of your brain?
Yeah, so it's the yacht club is a fiction, but it may be based on some things that I've seen in DC, because I take all that in. I mean, I'm a writer, so I'm constantly observing things, and Google Maps is great with the satellite imagery. You can zoom down how many spaces in the parking lot and stuff like that. So the club itself is a fiction, but it may have little touches of reality.
Well, I'll tell you what. Next time you're in DC, and I'm there, I'm in Maine for the summer. But when you're in D.C., let me take you to my club, and we'll show you what it's got. It's a very spooky club, if you know what I mean. I want to go and talk about history now for a moment. I had never heard of the Dearlerwanger Brigade. Am I saying that right? This is an SS brigade. How do you say it?
I think it's the Dearlerwanger Brigade, but my wife is the German speaker at home, and I'm on the road right now, so I don't have her close by to correct my horrible German pronunciation. But yes, that was one of the worst SS brigades, and Hitler threw them at the Warsaw Uprising, August to October of 1944. And what's amazing is the Red Army, they hung back because they wanted the Polish Home Army to get their butts kicked, and because they didn't want resistance once they came in and took over. So the things that brigade did, some of the most horrific war crimes committed outside of concentration camps, were committed that summer and into the fall by this SS brigade. And the guy that ran it was an alcoholic, drug-addled pedophile rapist, and he recruited from all the prisons and the nut houses, the same way the Wagner Group has been doing for the effort in Ukraine. So again, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And I had to include that because it was so close to what's happening today.
And that's when we go back to what a Brad Thor novel does. It teaches you history, it teaches you current events, and it also keeps you turning the pages as quickly as you can if you're not driving a porcelain bus. The Ravens are based on this brigade. People have to figure it out for themselves. I'm wrapping up, Brad, but I want to ask you about a line, if it's unique to you. Politics is the ultimate competitive sport. Now, I believe politics is a diversion for people who can't go into acting because they don't have the talent or the good looks or whatever, but it is addictive. Where did you get that line? Is that a Brad? Because it is the ultimate competitive sport. I'm addicted to it in the way I'm addicted to the Cleveland Guardians, Browns, and Cavaliers.
Well, so first of all, your line is great. I always heard DC was Hollywood for ugly people, and it's not true. It's not true across the board, but that's an old saw about DC. But no, I always tell people that politics is my baseball. You know how much I love politics, and I would rather have a discussion about politics than about baseball or football. So that line kind of came to me, not only because there are rabid fans, spectators like me, but there are people that will do anything to succeed in that business. Just like an athlete will take performance-enhancing drugs, there are a lot of politicians that'll do things that probably you and I wouldn't do, but just in the furtherance of their power and their ability to get reelected. So I really think it is the ultimate competitor sport.
Greg Wilson. I had lunch not long ago in the Senate dining room, and I ran into a former senator up there who's as clean as the day is long. I mean, squeaky clean. But I thought about the ex-senators that you see, because they retain the most exclusive place to have lunch in D.C., and I've been a couple of times, and you always see very interesting people in the Senate dining room. And I thought to myself, this guy is the perfect bad senator, bad ex-senator, and his scandal is perfect. Brad, I think this is going to sell better than any Brad Thor novel ever. How is it doing in pre-sales?
It's been fantastic. We're breaking records with it, so I couldn't be happier. Couldn't be happier. Thrilled.
Is that the cumulative effect of Brad Thor? Deadfall is the beneficiary of all the previous ones? Or is it because of the merger of yesterday's news with today's thriller?
I think it's all a combination. Can you be in the news? Can it be a topic that people are excited about? And the big thing for me is that I really stretch myself. This is the most intense thriller I've ever written. And it's not until I put it in the hands of the public that I know if people like it. And the reviews have been fabulous. And I've already heard from people that downloaded it at midnight last night and started reading it. And they think it's the best one I've ever written. So that's really high praise for an author.
Brad, I didn't want to say that, but I think it's the best one you've ever. That combat scene that begins, goes over the bridge at school. I can't remember how you call the personnel carrier, but all the technical terms are in there. I mean, I finally see it.
Yeah.
I'm not a gun guy, so I don't know anything about any of these things. I have no idea what they're using, the weaponry, but I see it, I can hear it. And I feel for the people who make it, and I don't feel for the people who don't. It's just very well done. Congratulations, Brad. Deadfall on the New York Times bestseller list, I'm sure. Deadfall. I think we've said it 7 times, so we've made the Frank Luntz rule. Good luck with the tour, and thanks for being generous with your time today.
Thank you, Hugh.
Be well.